Hello, and welcome to our video audio podcast, Couched in Color. I'm your mental health expert, teen and young adult crusader, and psychological scientist, Dr. Alfiee. This podcast reflects my life's work, helping our young people and young at heart identify mental health challenges, disrupt negative patterns, and discover the best versions of themselves. I'm so happy that you've joined us. For over 20 years, I want you to know that I've had my finger on the pulse of BIPOC teen mental health. I recognize that historically and currently, with these dual pandemics of COVID and racial injustice raging, our young people are suffering, sometimes they're struggling, and always the care that they need is quite scarce. So each week, I'm joined by young people, mental health experts, celebrities, and influencers to help us uncover the secrets to healing the hearts and minds of our BIPOC teens, their families, and their communities. Here at Couched in Color, we believe deeply in spreading love and light, bolstered by culturally relevant science. So let's dive in. All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure, fellow humans, to present to you this wonderful author from the imprint Simon & Schuster Books for Young Readers. She has this awesome book. It's right there in the shot. I'll pick it up and show it to you in a second, called The Cost of Knowing. Let's go ahead and do it now. This is the book. Yay. Make sure you get a good look at it. All right. And it's my pleasure to have the author here. So excited, Ms. Brittney Morris. So welcome, Brittany, to Couched in Color. This is the podcast where we talk about all things mental health and young people and teens and young adults. And it is such a pleasure to have you here. So would you just do us a favor for the audience and for this audio and video podcast, introduce yourself and tell us a little teeny bit about your book?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Hi everyone. My name is Brittney Morris. I'm the author of Slay, most recently The Cost of Knowing. I have an entry in the anthology Together Apart, and I also wrote Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales Wings of Fury. So that's kind of my book repertoire. I've been a published author for a couple years now, but I've always wanted to write ever since I was a kid. And with The Cost of Knowing, it really, well, I guess I'll back up a little bit. With my first book, Slay was a party. It was a celebration of all things Black, all Black people from all genders and all backgrounds and all countries. But there was a group that I felt was really underserved in that book, and that was specifically Black men. And so I said, okay, well, I want to throw a party for Black men specifically and celebrate Black manhood and Black masculinity. And um, when I started, I had this idea of writing about this happy-go-lucky, colorful Black teenage boy named Alex who worked in an ice cream shop and, was carefree and joyful. And then I started writing it and I said, okay, I'm having a great time. This is wonderful, but it feels almost tone deaf to just write pure joy like that without acknowledging the struggle also. And so I said, okay, one day I will write a Black boy joy book, but this is going to be my Black boy joy despite book. And so that's kind of how I've been envisioning the book being as I was writing it. So the story is about two Black teenage boys. The older one is Alex, the younger one is Isaiah, they're brothers. The older one, Alex, can see into the future with everything he touches. And the younger one can see into the past. And everything kind of changes when the older brother sees a vision of his younger brother dying in the next few days. And so it becomes a race against time to figure out where this 400-year-old family curse came from and stop Isaiah's demise. So it talks about anxiety, literally being able to see into the future and just having it constantly on your mind. It talks about the trauma in our past as Black people and how difficult it is to live in the present with that behind us, and how we often feel sandwiched in the middle. It talks about Black men and their mental health and how we need to be having conversations that are more than just, men talking about their feelings is sexy, but like we need actual conversations about mental health that like are accessible and meet Black men where they are, because the struggles of Black men are unique to Black men.
Mhm.
And that's something that needs to be acknowledged and talked about. So, as I was writing this, as I envisioned it out in the world on bookshelves, I wanted to be in a position where I was speaking alongside Black men and uplifting their voices and not speaking over them. And so I hope that I've done that. Um, I hope you love it, readers, and thank you so much for listening.
Oh, of
I'm really proud of it.
course. Oh, you should be really
Oh, I
proud of
forgot to
it.
hold it up.
Yes, hold it up. There you go. There you go. Put it in there. We're gonna make sure we get all the views, eyeballs on it we can. I love that you held up the book. I love that you are making sure that people get their eyeballs on it. And I'll tell you what really just got me going. And I'm so glad that your team reached out to us and just I'm so glad we connected and had the opportunity to have you on because as an author, I think that you make choices, right? Now I'm an author, but I'm not creative like you. I don't have those juices. I'm just like do like technical writing, right? And my technical writing is really inspired by my lived experience. So when I think about the kind of science that I do and how do I want to write in the way that I do science, that's what informed the most recent book that I wrote. And I have ideas for other books, but that's neither here nor there because we're here to talk about you and your book. But what I'm wondering about is you talked about the motivation that, this is not the time for the Black Boy Joy book. And I totally get that. I have a 14-year-old son. I have a spouse. My dad lives with me. So I'm surrounded by men and Black men, strong Black men. But at the same time, I was having a conversation a couple days ago. I think he might be like right out of graduate school, this young man I was talking to, like a master's program. And I'm looking at his beautiful face and I'm just thinking about like the weight of the world that must be on him, giving what we've been experiencing for the last year. And so obviously the mental health, I've started thinking about all the mental health aspects of it. And for you, what I'm curious about is how did you decide, okay, I'm not going to do this, is not the time for the Black Boy Joy book, but in the context of deciding to write this book, you have these two young men who are at the heart of it, but you also weave in all these themes, right? So you talked about anxiety. You talked about trauma. You talked about Black men's relationship to each other. You're talking about two young boys. How did you decide that the mental health themes needed to be woven into this? Because that's not like, I don't think people naturally go there. So I'm curious what motivated you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic question. While I was writing this, we were at, the peak of another wave of violence against Black people by the police in this country. And I just for for years I thought it was my responsibility to remember their names, remember the hashtags, remember details about each case. And that way, when people brought up, oh, why didn't they just, or if they had just, or why don't Black people just, I would be able to say, actually, this person on this date in this city did this and it didn't work.
Right, right,
um,
right.
and then it just began to wear on me.
Mm.
It just became too much. And when name after name was coming through the news, I just for the first time in my life had the impulse to be like, I'm turning off the news. I'm not watching the news for as long as I can. I can't deal with it. And it really started weighing on me. And so I had to, think about myself and my own mental health and just how heavy all of this is. Just going like as if it isn't enough to like have to think about how to censor ourselves in all white spaces, just stepping out the door in the morning. There's also the news that's telling us what our future is every single day. And then we're also, living with the pressure to be our ancestors' wildest dreams and everything. And as much as I love that sentiment, that is a lot of pressure.
Yes.
A
Yes.
whole lot of people worked really, really hard and sacrificed a lot so that we could be here doing what we do today, and it's a lot to live up to.
Yeah.
And so I knew I wanted to create two different characters who represented each half of that and
Yes.
how sandwiched they feel in the middle.
Yes.
Um, and I also do a lot of yoga, a lot of meditation, and there's so much talk about, there's so much talk about like being present and just being in the moment. And
Yeah.
I feel like that means something completely different when you have the experiences that we do.
Yeah.
So I knew I wanted to talk about that.
Wow. You said all the things that I love. You said yoga and you said meditation. Now, look, let me be real.
Yes.
My yoga skills are horrendous, but
Same.
meditation, that's my jam. I've been like meditating for years. So I'm just a quick side note. I'm curious, do you have any meditation apps or tools that you use that help you personally with meditation? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, so I have the Calm app,
Okay.
but more often than not, I watch, like, YouTube. There's a lot of,
Okay.
like, chakra meditations and free stuff on there, so
Oh,
yeah.
I love that. I
But
love okay.
I I just had a baby, though, so I am, like, getting back into the yoga scene. It was rough there for the last few
Congratulations.
months.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, that's
He's
awesome.
the sweetest baby.
That's so amazing. I mean, that if you can't meditate on the little cute little baby, I don't know, it's gotta be something wrong with somebody's brain because oh, look at that face. I
Thank
could just look at that
you.
all
He's the
day. What
sweetest
a
boy.
cutie. How old?
Thank
How old is your
you.
ba
3
Yeah, how
months.
oh, girl, you're not sleeping.
Nope.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
You said
All right.
you complimented my hair at the beginning of this, and I was just kinda like,
Really?
"Okay."
It's cute though. I know it was probably like you were rushed because that's a lot. Like doing things in between, like when the baby sleeps, you got to do stuff, or when somebody else has a baby for you. But you did a good job, girlfriend, because it looks gorgeous. I love it. It's very cute.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So I think I keep wanting to call him Rufus, but his name is Alex. And Alex is in Isaiah, right? Did I get that right? Alex and Isaiah.
Yes.
The relationship. Tell me because I love this idea of thinking about our mental health as lots of things. But one aspect of mental health that I don't think we talk a lot about is how men relate to each other, how boys relate to
Mm,
each other, right? And I think that those relationships are so key. And often, whenever we do talk about this topic, I feel like it's always kind of been only a couple of contexts, right? So we're either talking about brothers who play basketball together or football together, they're on a team together. That's what we see in the public eye. Or I'm thinking about like Jay-Z rapping about his boys, his crew. The one name that always sticks out is Tata, because he's always talking about Tata. Tata gonna take care of his kids. Tata can jump over everybody. You know what I mean? Tata is a short dude, but he's like a giant. That's just the first thing that comes to mind. And I don't think we hear enough about other aspects in other contexts of
yeah.
men's relationship. I also don't think we hear a lot about boys and boys' relationship to each other. It's always kind of in retrospect, I think about my daughter is kind of fascinated with a couple of young NBA stars. She didn't really pay attention to it that much, but there's a couple. I think one is Jason Tatum. I think that's his name. And he's friends with Bradley Beal because there are all these connections, but it's always from when they were young kids, right? It's not about their relationship now. That's what you hear about. So I'm curious about the development and evolution of talking about the relationship that boys have with each other and how those relationships positively and negatively impact mental health. And I'm just wondering what thoughts you have about that in the context of what you've written.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So, backing up a little bit, when I wrote Slay, I kind of just created Kira's character, and then every new character that came into the book revealed something new about Kira's character. And so the same thing kind of happened with Alex. So he has his little brother, and so that puts him in the position of being the older brother, feeling like he needs to take care of him. Their parents passed away 4 years before, and so Alex is feeling the need to fill the gap left by their father. Um, he also has they're being taken care of by their aunt Mackie, who is working a lot. She's quite
Mm-hmm.
often out of not out of the picture, but out of the
Mm-hmm.
house.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so he's trying to figure out how to be a nephew, but also in a son role, and
Mm-hmm.
also feeling the need to take care of her because she's a
Mm-hmm.
single woman taking care of
Mm-hmm.
them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part in the book where she comes up to him and she says, "Thank you so much for being an older brother that Isaiah can look up to." And then she brings in the like, "You're a man now," like you're the
Mm-hmm.
man of the house kind of thing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, that's a fine line because that's a compliment, but also not his responsibility. He's a
No,
kid.
that's right. That's
So,
right.
and then yeah, and then of course there's Alex's girlfriend who there was an interesting dynamic that I was glad I was able to explore with that because she little bit this is revealing a
Yeah.
lot,
Don't give too
but it's
much.
not quite
Yeah.
as
Don't give too
yeah.
much.
But there is talk of sex, and Alex's approach to it, and for most of the book, he's just not ready,
I think
and
about
so
right.
he's questioning, like, is there some like, this is not what I
What's
hear
going on?
about on TV and the media, online, like, you know, what kind of man am I if I'm not ready for something so intimate? and like really, really wanted to talk about how different it is for everyone. I'm Demi myself, and so I was questioning for a long time, is like, is there something
Mhm.
wrong with me? Am I ace? Why is it taking me so long to become attracted to somebody? And it's like
Mhm.
everyone's experience is so different, and the
Mhm.
pressure to be this like hypersexual, hyper masculine figure is
Mhm.
absolutely not okay, and it's something we
Mhm.
should be fighting against in literature and in the way we raise our sons.
Mhm. Oh my God, so powerful and so many layers to what you shared. I want to go back to two things. One is for people who don't know, right? Because there's a couple people who may not know. You said, did I hear you correctly? You said you identify as Demi.
Yes.
So some people don't know what Demi is. Are you comfortable sharing, explaining that to people, and they're not going to ask you a follow up question?
Absolutely. So demi is short for demisexual, which means, just for me anyway, that I need an emotional connection with someone before becoming sexually attracted to them. So an example that I always love to give was I went to see Magic Mike, and when I came home, people were like, "How was it?" And I was like, "I mean, the plot could have been better." And they were
Girl.
like,
That
what?
what like
That's
they're
not what
like,
I was asking."
y'all ladies, y'all missed the point. Shoot. And I was like, I feel you. Cause
I
at
don't
the
know
end of
Channing
it,
Tatum
I
like
was
that,
like,
so
right. And it took me, now I'm gonna disclose. I just watched it this year. That's how long, right? And that movie's old. They've had two of them, and I've never
wow.
seen the second one. Yeah. And people were like, oh, you got it. And I watched it and I was like, okay. It's not a bad movie. It was just, you know what I mean? It was just like you kind of knew what got people excited about it. I'm not criticizing or anything. It's just
Yeah.
the plot. It was sort of like the plot was not the point. Do you know what I mean? The point
Yeah.
was them taking their clothes
Mhm.
off and like being all. That was the
Yeah.
point. So I really appreciate you explaining that for for those of us, because there are people out there who don't know what that means. And so we try to really cater to an audience that sort of like your book, right? You're talking to some adults. It's for young readers, so you're talking to young people. But adults like me are going to want to read books like this because I think in some ways it helps us relate to I'll speak for myself as a parent of teenagers. It helps me relate to my children better. And I love the idea. This is the second part of the question of looking at that fine line, because often we will say things and not realize the pressure that we're putting on young people. Right. So when you talk about the aunt,
Yes.
it reminds me a little bit of the relationship T.I. has with his uncle in ATL in the movie, where T.I. sort of the man. He is kind of the man of the house. And I have my personal opinions about that, about us like the adultification of our kids. I just have really strong feelings about that. And I'm wondering for you, did you feel like you wanted to communicate a message about what that does to young people when we put them in positions like that? Because you said earlier about the pressure of we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. That's true, but it is a lot of pressure. Because what does it mean if you're not like being like some superstar or you get straight A's, or you know what I mean, or I don't know, you a youth usher at church or whatever the case may be? Are you not your ancestors' wildest dreams? So I love that concept, and I'm just wondering if you could talk to us a little bit more about your thoughts about adding that into the book, and what message maybe you don't, you're an author, you don't dictate what people take away from it, but are there certain things you hope people will take away from things like that, just scenes like that?
Absolutely. So I intentionally try to put my readers in the shoes of people going through tough situations. So Alex's situation is very, like, not heard of with his powers and everything. Like it's this is magical realism here. So, but I exaggerated it to the point where he is so protective of his younger brother because he knows at any minute his younger brother could lose his life. And so he feels so much responsibility to keep him safe. He sees his little brother like interacting with Aunt Mackie, and Aunt Mackie being like, no, you can't have more candy or whatever it is, and sends Isaiah to his room. And Alex is sitting there like, but you don't have much longer with
That's
him.
right. Give him some candy. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And so when the reader hears something like, oh, you're doing such a great job being the man of the house, in everyday life, they might hear, oh, what a nice thing to say. But in this book, if they hear Aunt Mackie say to Alex, oh, you're doing such a great job being the man of the house, I hope their reaction is partially, he's already under immense pressure to do
That's right.
well.
That's right.
Why?
That's right. Don't do
So
this to him.
yeah. So that was the goal with that scene. That's one of my favorite scenes too. And in that scene,
Ah,
she also is like, what like she gives him a little bit of champagne. And she's like, we're celebrating like how grown up you are and all this stuff. So I really drove it home that like
right.
that's
She's
that's really
looking
not
at
a good
him
idea.
like the man of the house. Yeah, like this is the
Yes.
role that she's putting him in. And I think sometimes often we do kids a disservice because you think about the pressure that young people are already under, and then you think about the access they have to information and knowledge that's all around them. And so they're already hearing stories about how when by the time they hit 11 or 12, 10, actually, I think is what the research says, for boys, people are already looking at them as adults at the age of 10. So I think about like
Mhm.
Tamir Rice, who's 12, right? Running around with a toy, right? And people are perceiving him as a threat. I think about Trayvon Martin. He was a kid, right? Or I
Mhm.
think about the ways in which there was some big scandal. Oh, this young man who played Duke basketball, I think his name is Jalen Johnson. He's freshman year, first year. And after partway through the season, he quit. Okay, let's think about how old somebody first year in college is. That's a 17, 18-year-old, maybe 19, right? And there are
Mhm.
all these people chirping about, oh, how can he leave his team? And all I kept thinking was, he's a child.
Mhm.
I don't care if he's a 6'8" or however tall he is, looking like a grown a man. He's a child.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? And so he's an older child, but he's still a child. Literally, his age has teen in it. He's a teenager. And so I like the idea that you really drove home this point of this is how I interpret it. It's not cool to put our kids in a position like that. And like you said, with the magical realism aspect of the book, he's already got all this weight on him. He's like Atlas already. So you're like adding another planet on top of Atlas's back. And
Yeah.
it's just it's too much. And so do you think that there are certain kinds of impacts in terms of mental health that kind of pressure puts on kids, like speculating? And if so, what do you think that does to young people?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I I remember back to my childhood because I grew up in an abusive home. Emotionally, verbally, it was not pretty.
I'm sorry.
And I just remember from like the 3rd grade, all I wanted was to get out.
Mm,
All I wanted was I was looking forward to my high school graduation so much. Like it was
mhm,
all I wanted was just to leave my house. And so it kind of made me grow up pretty fast. Like
mhm,
I had my first job at 14 and a half. Like
mm,
it was, I was running to get out of there. Like
mhm,
looking into colleges in like the 5th grade, that kind of thing.
mhm,
And I think when you're in a traumatic situation or you're in a heavy situation, you have a lot more responsibility than you really should have to deal with.
mhm, mhm,
There's this pressure to like keep it moving.
mhm, mhm.
And sometimes, to keep it moving, you have to act older than you really are.
Yes.
Like you don't have time to play.
Yes.
And I definitely think that's Alex's situation. He is um there's a big thread in the story is the relationship between Alex and his job and Alex and his
Yeah.
boss,
Yeah.
who is quite toxic.
A little bit.
And um his boss is putting this pressure on him to like, be completely dedicated to this job at this ice cream store. And he's an extreme cheapskate, and so he's like he won't get like, an air conditioning system even though it's like 95 degrees in the front room. Like his employees are sweating and suffering and all sorts of stuff. And just
Not to
Alex does not
mention,
have
it's a kid. He's employing kids. We don't forget that part. But go
exactly.
ahead.
Yep. That too. And so Alex, like, calls out sick, and he doesn't specify what kind of, what he means by sick mentally or physically, but he says, I'm not feeling well.
Right.
And his boss says, I know that, you're still grieving your parents, but I saw you in the graveyard and you didn't look sick to me,
Yep.
basically. And it's
Suck it up.
like, yo,
Mm-hmm.
there's different kind of illnesses, and mental
Mm-hmm.
illness is a real one. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just I talked about so different ways that Alex is under pressure from all sides. And I really feel
Yeah.
like that should be discussed more. Just Black
Yes.
men in their relationship with a whole bunch of different big categories. I also talked about Alex's father,
Mm-hmm.
in that his father was, present. He really was a hard
Mm-hmm.
worker.
Mm-hmm.
He loved his family clearly, but
Mm-hmm.
he also passed on some pretty toxic ideas about what Black
Toxicity.
masculinity was. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like he did it maliciously. He did it out of
Mm-hmm.
love, and so Alex could be successful, but Alex is redefining what success looks like for him throughout the book.
I love it. And that resonates with me so much because I can't remember the young man's name. But there's a brother I follow on Instagram. He had a post that went viral a while ago, but he's had a couple of posts. And even thinking about it, I don't even know why I get teary, but I feel like this young brother, he's a dark chocolate young man. He has a little girl. I don't know if he has multiple kids, but everybody saw it, and he is walking down the street with his daughter, and he's talking about this concept of toxic masculinity and how heavy it is for Black men, and how Black men need to really, just what you said, they need to really examine that, and examine intergenerational trauma and redefine Black masculinity for themselves. So I'm sure he's
Hmm.
probably a millennial, like a young guy, like a young millennial. But what spoke to me so much about what you just said is you are giving voice, you are putting eyes on, you are creating a vision for not only the pressure, but giving examples of how a young person like Alex navigates all of that. So just even as you're talking, I'm thinking, good Lord, I forgot he had all that stuff on him. Right. So you got a boss that you're responsible to. You got an aunt that you're responsible to. You got a baby brother that you're responsible to. You got a girlfriend that you're responsible to. Meanwhile, you got school that you're responsible for. So there are all these things that I think we never stop and think what kind of pressure kids are under. And so for a lot of us parents, this book will be really important to read because we need to understand how the messages that we impart to our children, the weight that they carry, right? And sometimes we put our young people in a position where they have to unlearn and relearn to be healthy.
Hmm.
And so it feels like you put a lot of thought into that. It feels like you put a lot of consideration and weight on what kind of messages are we transmitting to our young people. And I guess it really sort of brings, and you said that a couple times, so I don't want to like keep going over that thread, but I really do respect and appreciate the thoughtfulness of the way that you have approached it, right? You're not like lecturing people. You're just giving them examples. You're showing them how hurtful it can be when somebody looks at you and says, well, I don't really know what your pain is, but whatever your pain is, I'm gonna need you to suck it up, right? Or I don't really know what your pain is, but I can't see it. So you know what I'm saying? I
Yep.
mean, that's what we do. Suck it up.
Yep.
And it's not right. But yeah, so I really appreciate that about what you've written in the book. And I think what it takes me back to, this is another question that I have, is how did you decide in general to channel, I'm making an assumption, so correct me if I'm wrong, to channel your own experiences into this job or this career of becoming a writer? Because there are lots of other things you could have done. How did you
Hmm.
decide on writing?
I love that question. So going back to my abusive childhood, I um, I was extremely sheltered, to the point where I could only take in Christian media, and I had to give 24-hour notice before I had any friends over, and there were so many rules, and just my dad had a lot of control issues. And once I had put together every puzzle in the house and read every book in the house, all I had left was the blank page. And so I was like, well, I guess, if I can't take in anything else, I'll just make my own.
Yes.
And so it all started with a journal assignment in school, because on top of my life at home, I was heavily bullied at school. And so the teacher, I remember this so vividly. I even remember what the journal looked like. She passed us all journals and she said, okay, every day I want you to write a journal entry of what's going on in your life. And I was like, no, you don't.
You're not ready. Y'all ain't
No, you
ready.
don't.
Y'all ain't ready.
So I was like, I am not going to write about how I am at school or how I am at home. I'm just going to make stuff up. And so I wrote this story about, these two princesses who are sisters. And it was very like your standard medieval romance battles and all that. And I sent it in. And the next day she came back to the class and she said, okay, I read all your journal entries. There was one that really stood out to me. And, she was like, I'm going to read this out loud anonymously. And if the author wants to reveal themselves, they can. And so she read, it was supposed to be a page long. I wrote 8 pages. She read all 8 pages out loud to the class. And I got to look around like anonymously at everybody else who was looking around like, did
Who
somebody in
did
this
this?
class write this? Yeah.
Yes.
And I never got over that feeling. And I was like, if I could do this, once I found out you could do it as a job, I was like, oh, that's it. That's all. That's it. That's all I want to do.
Ah, so it's that encouragement, right? You got somebody saw something in you and they pulled that out and they like the Lion King, they held it up like Simba and said, look at this, right? This
Yeah.
is this is a thing. This is wonderful. This is beautiful. What an incredible, I mean, I don't know if it feels like it to you, but that's just an incredible story because it just speaks to the power of how adults, right? What the power they have to do good things and plant seeds in you to allow those seeds to germinate. And I love that. And I really believe there are no accidents. So it's not an accident that it happened the way that it did, that this was a teacher that gave you the journal, that gave you the opening to write and express what you were dealing with in a way that felt comfortable for you. Right. And I wonder a
Yeah.
little bit, I think I know the answer, but is there a part of this that's therapeutic for you? All of the writing that you do as an author?
It was very cathartic. I mean, this book was on another level cathartic because I was while writing this, we were trying to have a baby. And then while I was editing this book, I was pregnant and I knew I was having a son. And so I had all of these feelings about, being the mom of a little black boy, and my husband's white. And so I had no idea what shade he was going to be. I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I got to prepare for anything out here. His experiences
Right.
could be very different.
Right.
And just so many thoughts going through my head, and I don't know if I could have written this book now that I have a son. Like this, I mean, this book took a lot out of me before I was a mom. Um, so yeah, I think that answer. I hope that answered your
No, you
question.
did. Totally, totally, totally. That I mean, it's for those of us who are fortunate enough to have the experience, there is nothing like looking in that little baby's face, right? It's just there's nothing like the
Mhm.
joy that you know what I mean. The joy, the unconditional love is there's just so much there.
Yeah,
So it's such a blessing, and I'm so happy for you that you have the gift of having this experience. And I guess as we wind down a little bit, I'm curious, what do you think, or how do you think Alex? What kinds of words of wisdom do you think Alex would share with your little boy to encourage him about what it means to be a young man in the
oh,
2000s, what it means to grow up? What kind of advice do you think he would give him for how he can take care of himself and his own mental health?
I think first and foremost, he would say, be honest with yourself about whether you need help, and if you need help, get help. And that can look like so many different things. It can look
Yeah.
like, helping yourself, getting outside, getting some fresh air, signing up for a yoga class. My husband and my husband was walking around for like 2 years, just stiff as a board, shoulders getting higher by the day. And I was
Yeah.
like, can you please take a yoga class with me? And he was like, isn't it going to be full of women? Isn't it the length that it took to get him into something that he thought was for not men was insane. So I think Alex would definitely tell my son get the resources that you need, and don't be afraid to wave your hand and say, I'm not okay, I need help, I need X, Y, and Z, I need a break, I need a walk, I need some water, whatever it is.
Mm, mm.
um and I really think that's what taking care of yourself looks like, not necessarily buying all sorts of expensive stuff and seeking validation from other people, but really giving yourself what you need.
Oh, I love
And I love
that.
that you mentioned Atlas earlier, the metaphor Atlas
Yes.
holding up the world. That's
Oh,
my,
yeah.
my son's name.
Is
Yeah.
it? Oh my
Mhm.
gosh. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
for
Oh, I
multiple
love
reasons,
it.
actually. We named
Okay.
him that because we love to travel. We named him that because we want him to explore the world and see beyond Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Um, and lastly, I want him to know that he doesn't have to hold up his burdens by himself. Like,
Mm.
I want that to be in his head for his entire life.
Ah, ah,
So,
I love that. That is just so, and who would have thought? I was like, that reference just came to me because, because there is so much, and that's your baby's name. Talk about serendipity. I love that. That's so beautiful. And I think,
yeah.
given this conversation that we've just had and given from your spirit and what you poured into this book that you've written, I think that Atlas will know that there's no need to carry anything by himself. He'll know. He'll know. That's beautiful.
Yay.
That is so beautiful. So as we close
Thank
out,
you.
I am curious about if you would, I'm sorry, not curious. I wonder if you would share with our audience, where can they follow you? Where can they go get your books? Now, you mentioned two. Are those only two, or are there other books that you've written?
So I have written 3, and then I
Got it.
have the anthology Together Apart, and then
Okay.
I'm also working on my next book, which is called The Jump, which is about
Okay.
4 teenagers in Seattle, um, following a cryptology contest, and it's pretty high stakes because there's an oil refinery going up in their neighborhood, and they want influence to get it out of there. So,
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So Slay, right? The Cost of
mhm,
Knowing. Got this one.
mhm.
Together. What was the last one that you're working on? Jump.
Together Apart,
And then
the
Together Apart. That's
anthology,
the anthology.
and then
Together Apart.
mhm. Yep, and then there's The Jump, and then there's the Spider-Man Miles Morales Wings of Fury book that
Girl,
came out
let's
in
see. I'm so
October.
glad you mentioned that. I'm so glad you mentioned that because my son's name is Miles. And look, let me tell you something.
Whoa!
When Miles Morales came out, we were all like, when are they making this movie? Because my son is the person. They need to get Miles to play Miles Morales because he perfectly, like his face, he could do it. We were so geeked. I think I went out and
Oh,
bought all the comic books. They like the first set that came out, and they were, I think it was like 4 of them. I have a picture of him in the comic book store sitting, crisscross applesauce with his head in the Miles Morales book. And that whole thing about representation for all these little Black and Latinx boys out here, Black Latinx, African American Latinx, you know what I mean? That is like so meaningful. And, maybe next time I have you on, you can talk to me about what that experience was like writing like about Miles Morales. Cause look, I'm not a comic book person, but I'm kind of half obsessed. I did watch the little movie. Remember was it Into the Spider-Verse? The
Into
Miles
the
Morales
Spider-Verse.
movie?
It was so good.
Oh my
Mhm.
God, girl. It was like,
So
I could like
good.
watch it over and over and over. I loved it. I loved it.
Yep.
Even the way that they treated the villain character, right? It wasn't
Mhm,
like just whatever. Like I felt like I understood, right? And I
mhm.
felt like it had cultural nuance that I don't know that it could have had, maybe had they not had the right people working on it, right? Because I saw the production team or the leadership team for it. So anyway, that's another story for another day. So Ms. Brittney Morris, I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to remind everybody to go get this awesome book, The Cost of Knowing, and your other books, including the anthology, the another book that you wrote, and the book that you're working on. So when that book comes out, you have to come back and talk to us about that. And just thank you so much for lifting up.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we would love to have you. Thank you so much for lifting up our young people, our young Black men, and reminding them that they matter. And I know Atlas is super proud of his mama, even if he can't say it yet. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
You are
Thanks
so
for having
welcome.
me. This has been super fun.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad. So there you have it. That's a wrap for another episode of Couched in Color. We want you to know that we deeply value you, all of our viewers and our listeners, and everyone out there working to support optimal mental health, both for themselves and for our young people. And one of the best ways you can help our movement is by leaving us a 5-star review on our YouTube channel and everywhere you enjoy your audio podcasts, and by sharing our podcast with a friend. Please also tag us while you're out there listening and watching. Finally, head on over to dralfiee.com for more information about me, www.acomaproject.org for information about my nonprofit. And those are the places you can go to learn more about how you can help. So I'll see you next week. And until then, I'm going to say what I always say, which is that I'm wishing you lots of love, lots of light, and that I'm hoping it is always, always informed by good, culturally relevant science. Take care.